A day like any other. The sun was shining bright over the bustling city streets, and people hurried past each other, focused on their busy lives. Among them was Marcus Williams, a tall, well-dressed black man with a calm smile on his face. Today was just a regular day for him. He had a few errands to run and planned to meet a friend later for lunch. He had always been a peaceful man, known in his community for his kindness and patience. Marcus was on his way to the grocery store, humming to himself and enjoying the warm weather. The grocery store was just a few blocks away, so he decided to take his time, greeting a few familiar faces along the way. Many people recognized him in the area, as he was known for volunteering at a local community center. Children waved to him as he passed, and he waved back with a grin. Just as he was nearing the store, Marcus noticed a police car parked on the side of the road. He thought nothing of it and continued walking, but his relaxed mood quickly shifted when two police officers stepped out of the car and began approaching him. He glanced around, feeling a bit confused, but remained calm. "Excuse me, sir," one of the officers said, stopping him in his tracks. "We need to ask you a few questions." Marcus nodded politely. "Of course, officers. Is there a problem?" The officers exchanged a glance before one of them spoke up. "We just need to confirm some things. Could you please show us your identification?" Marcus was slightly taken aback. He hadn't done anything to attract attention, and he certainly didn't understand why he was being stopped. However, he didn't want to cause any trouble, so he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, handing them his ID. The officers examined his ID closely, looking at him suspiciously. Marcus could feel their eyes studying him as if he had done something wrong. Trying to keep calm, he asked, "Is there something specific you're looking for? I'm just out running errands." One of the officers looked him over and then glanced at his partner. "Where are you headed?" he asked, not bothering to answer Marcus's question. "To the grocery store," Marcus replied, doing his best to stay calm. "Is there something wrong?" The officer didn't respond directly. "Mind telling us where you were before this?" Marcus took a deep breath, feeling his patience beginning to waver. "I was just at home before this. I don't really understand why I'm being questioned." The second officer stepped forward, his tone a bit harsher. "It's routine. Just cooperate, and we'll get this over with quickly." Marcus frowned but nodded. He didn't want to create a scene, so he answered each question calmly, even though they were starting to seem pointless. People on the street began to notice the scene, whispering among themselves. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, and it made him uncomfortable. After a few more questions, Marcus thought they would let him go. But then, one of the officers suddenly said, "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Marcus froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why were they doing this? "Just turn around," the officer said firmly, as if he were giving an order. Feeling a rush of confusion and frustration, Marcus slowly turned around, placing his hands behind his back as instructed. One of the officers stepped forward and placed cold handcuffs on his wrists. Marcus's heart began to pound as the reality of the situation set in. He was being arrested. For what? "Is this really necessary?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll explain everything once we're at the station," the officer replied, avoiding Marcus's gaze. The people around them stared in shock and confusion. Some even took out their phones, recording what was happening. Marcus felt a mix of anger and embarrassment, but he stayed quiet, hoping that this was just a misunderstanding. Surely the police would realize that he hadn't done anything wrong. As they led him to the police car, Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. He didn't want to make the situation worse by showing anger. But in his mind, he couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. "You said an unexpected arrest." Marcus sat quietly in the back of the police car, his mind racing. He still had no idea why he was being arrested. Through the tinted windows, He could see the concerned faces of people watching as the police car pulled away. The shock and confusion were written all over his face as the car sped through the city streets, heading toward the police station. Marcus tried to calm himself, taking deep breaths, hoping this was some kind of mistake that would soon be cleared up. As they arrived at the station, the officers led Marcus through the front doors and into a cold, dimly lit hallway. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls, filling the silence. Marcus tried to ask questions, but each time he spoke, the officers would either ignore him or respond with, "Just wait until we get to the interview room." The lack of answers only made him more frustrated and anxious. Finally, they reached a small room with a single metal table and 2 chairs. They uncuffed him and gestured for him to sit. Marcus lowered himself into the chair, his mind still spinning. He watched as one officer left the room, leaving him alone with the other. The officer sat down across from him, his expression unreadable. Marcus couldn't hold back his questions any longer. "Officer, please, can you tell me what this is all about? Why am I here?" The officer looked at him for a moment before replying. "Routine procedure. We just need to ask you a few questions. We have reason to believe that you might have some information relevant to an investigation." Marcus raised an eyebrow, confused. "Relevant information? I'm just a regular guy. I don't understand what I could know that's useful to the police." The officer shifted in his seat, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "Just answer the questions, Mr. Williams," he said, sounding almost defensive. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the surge of frustration rise within him. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, so why were they treating him like a suspect? But he kept his cool, determined to stay calm and cooperative. "Fine," Marcus said slowly. "Ask me whatever you need to." The officer began asking a series of strange questions about his work, his friends, where he had been over the past few weeks, and if he had any connections to certain people whose names he didn't recognize. Each question seemed more random than the last. Marcus answered honestly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why were they asking these questions? And why hadn't they told him what he was being accused of? As the questioning continued, Marcus noticed that the officer was avoiding certain details, as if there was something he didn't want Marcus to know. The officer kept glancing at his notes, looking frustrated when Marcus's answers didn't match whatever he seemed to expect. At one point, Marcus dared to ask, "Do you think I look like someone you're looking for? Is this some kind of mistake?" The officer hesitated, then shrugged. "We just need to confirm a few things, Mr. Williams." The vague answer only added to Marcus's confusion. He knew he hadn't done anything illegal, and his record was clean. So why were they keeping him here, treating him like a criminal? After what felt like hours, the officer finally stood up, gathering his notes and giving Marcus a hard look. "Stay here. Someone will be back to speak with you soon." Marcus watched as the officer left, the door clicking shut behind him. Alone in the silent room, Marcus tried to process everything that had just happened. The officers clearly suspected something, but what? The situation felt surreal. He had been running errands just an hour ago, and now he was sitting in an interrogation room with no idea why. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm and think clearly. Whatever was happening, he was determined to cooperate fully. But deep down, he couldn't help but feel a hint of dread. At the police station, minutes passed, then stretched into nearly an hour, with Marcus still sitting alone in the cold, empty room. He glanced around, his fingers tapping nervously on the metal table. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening, but nothing made sense. The officers' questions had been so strange, almost as if they expected him to be someone else entirely. Just when Marcus thought he would be left waiting forever, the door swung open. Another officer entered, holding a clipboard and accompanied by a second officer who looked serious and stern. The first officer glanced down at Marcus's file, then up at him, studying him with a suspicious gaze. He motioned for Marcus to sit back down. "Mr. Williams," the officer said, his voice low and direct. "Let's go over a few things again. We need to confirm your identity." "My identity?" Marcus replied, frowning. "I've shown you my ID. What more do you need to know?" The officer ignored his question. "Let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?" Marcus answered calmly, "New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up there my whole life." The officer checked a box on his clipboard, then asked, "And where are you currently employed?" "I work for a community outreach program. We focus on helping at-risk youth. I volunteer there most days," Marcus replied. He hoped that would give them a clearer picture of the type of person he was, someone dedicated to helping others. The officer's pen hovered over his clipboard, and he gave Marcus a look that seemed to hide a hint of doubt. "And can you explain why you were in this part of town today?" Marcus sighed, doing his best to keep his patience. "Like I said earlier, I was running errands. I was just on my way to the grocery store when you stopped me. That's all." The officers exchanged glances, and Marcus felt a shiver of unease. He couldn't understand why they were asking these pointless questions, questions that didn't seem to connect to anything he had done. It was as if they were searching for something that wasn't there. "Is there any reason," one of the officers began slowly, "that someone might want to use your identity, or pose as you?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Pose as me? No, I don't think so. Why would anyone do that?" The officer's gaze sharpened. "We have information suggesting that someone matching your description has been involved in certain activities. Your name was flagged in our system, and we need to ensure we have the right person." Marcus felt a mixture of confusion and frustration rise within him. "I'm just a regular guy," he said, his voice steady but growing firmer. I volunteer in my community, and I have a clean record. I don't know what you're trying to imply, but I've done nothing wrong." The officers seemed unfazed. The second officer crossed his arms, watching Marcus carefully, as if trying to read him. Finally, he spoke up. "We need to check a few things before we can let you go, Mr. Williams. It's important we confirm everything." Marcus shook his head, feeling the weight of their stares. "Confirm what? You're treating me like a criminal when I haven't done anything wrong. This doesn't feel like routine to me." The first officer took a deep breath, as though reluctant to reveal more. "We've been tracking an individual who has managed to avoid the authorities for years. This person is highly influential and has connections at the highest levels. Our records flagged your name and appearance, so we have to follow protocol." Marcus stared at him, his shock evident. They thought he might be some kind of high-level criminal. "With all due respect, officers, I think you've got the wrong man." The second officer's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "That's what we're trying to determine, Mr. Williams. We have to investigate every lead." The officers stepped out again, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He felt a strange mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. All he wanted was to go back to his day, to return to the peace of his ordinary life. But now it felt like he was caught in something far bigger than he could understand. Sitting there, Marcus wondered who this mysterious person could be, and why did the police think he might be connected? He was a man who valued honesty, peace, and community. Whatever was happening, he knew one thing for sure. He would do everything in his power to prove his innocence. A mysterious revelation. Marcus's patience was wearing thin. He had been sitting alone in the interrogation room for hours, replaying the officer's words in his mind. They mentioned a high-profile criminal, someone who was connected to powerful people and had managed to avoid capture for years. But how could they possibly think that he, a community volunteer with a clean record, could be that person? Finally, the door opened again, and this time, the officer who entered was accompanied by a third man, an older detective with a calm, intense gaze. He looked Marcus over, sizing him up in a way that made Marcus feel both uncomfortable and oddly curious. The detective took a seat across from Marcus and introduced himself as Detective Harris. "Mr. Williams," he began in a calm, measured voice. "We need to discuss something that might be difficult for you to hear." Marcus raised an eyebrow, feeling a mixture of suspicion and apprehension. "I've already heard plenty of strange things today. What's this all really about?" Detective Harris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We believe you have a connection to someone important," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "There's a chance that someone may have stolen your identity to shield themselves from the authorities." Marcus shook his head, still trying to process the situation. "I've been living my life without any trouble, no issues with the law. If someone stole my identity, wouldn't I have noticed?" Harris nodded. "Typically, yes. But in rare cases, it's possible for someone to use another's identity in specific ways that aren't easily detected by the public, especially if they're skilled and have powerful resources." Marcus's frustration grew. "So what does this have to do with me? I haven't done anything wrong. I don't even know anyone involved in crime." Detective Harris gave him a steady look. "We understand that, Mr. Williams, but we're dealing with a highly influential figure here, someone who may have been operating under your name for a long time. And given recent developments, we had to investigate you thoroughly to be certain." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. It was like something out of a movie. A man living an honest life, only to discover that a criminal mastermind might be using his name in secret. "And what kind of developments are we talking about?" he asked cautiously. Harris took a deep breath. "There's a network we've been monitoring for years, a group involved in major illegal activities across the country. They're good at staying hidden, and they're clever about using false identities. We have reason to believe that the leader of this network may have assumed your identity." Marcus's mind raced, struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. "Wait, are you saying there's someone out there, a criminal, pretending to be me?" Harris nodded. "That's exactly what we're saying. We couldn't ignore the possibility, and that's why we had to bring you in." Marcus took a moment to absorb this, feeling a mix of relief and anger. Relief that they were starting to believe he wasn't the criminal they were searching for, and anger at the thought that someone had been using his name to commit crimes. "But why me?" he asked, voice rising in frustration. "Why would they choose my identity?" The detective shrugged. "It's hard to say. Sometimes they choose people with clean records, people who wouldn't arouse suspicion. You have a good reputation, Mr. Williams. You're respected in your community. To someone trying to hide, you were the perfect choice." Marcus felt a surge of indignation. "So while I've been out here volunteering and helping people, someone has been tarnishing my name behind my back." Detective Harris nodded solemnly. "I understand this is a lot to take in. But we're here to work with you, not against you. We need your help to piece together any possible connections, anything you might know, even if it seems insignificant." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. This was beyond anything he could have imagined when he woke up that morning. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice tired but determined. Harris's eyes met his, a look of trust and determination in his gaze. "We'll need to go over your past contacts, any unusual encounters you might have had, anything that stands out. If we work together, we might be able to uncover the truth." Marcus nodded slowly, a new sense of resolve building within him. "I'll help in any way I can. I want to clear my name and make sure this person is caught." The detective extended a hand, and Marcus shook it, sealing their agreement. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. He didn't know how long this would take or what dangers might lie ahead, but he was determined to see it through. As the detective left the room, Marcus sat back, feeling the weight of his situation, but also a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom anymore. He was fighting to reclaim his identity. A hidden connection emerges. After hours of questioning, Marcus was finally allowed a short break. He stretched his arms and rubbed his tired eyes, his mind racing with thoughts of the shocking revelations Detective Harris had shared. It was overwhelming to think that someone had used his identity to operate under the radar, and worse, that person was involved in serious, high-level crime. As he sat in a quiet room with a cup of water, he tried to recall every unusual event, every unfamiliar face he had encountered in the past few years. Nothing seemed to fit, but just then something struck him, a memory from months ago. There had been a strange man who'd approached him after one of his community outreach events. The man had been polite but oddly curious, asking Marcus questions that seemed personal but vague. He'd asked about Marcus's work, his interests, even his family. At the time, Marcus had thought he was just an overly curious attendee, maybe a potential volunteer. Could that man have had something to do with this? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Before he could dwell on it further, Detective Harris entered the room and sat across from him, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Williams," Harris said, "I know this is difficult, but any details you can remember, anything strange or out of the ordinary, could help us narrow down our investigation." Marcus took a deep breath, then described the encounter. "A few months ago, at one of my community events, a man came up to me. He asked a lot of questions, personal ones, like he was digging for something. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, I wonder if he had a motive." Detective Harris's eyes narrowed, and he scribbled some notes. "Do you remember anything specific about him? What he looked like, or anything he said?" Marcus thought carefully, piecing together the details. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair at the temples. He dressed well, too. I remember him mentioning something about connections. He hinted he could introduce me to people who might help my organization. Harris nodded slowly. "It's possible he was testing you, trying to see if you'd be willing to join his network, or at the very least, if you'd be easy to impersonate." Marcus shuddered, realizing just how vulnerable he had been. "I didn't think much of it then. I just thought he was a supporter. I never saw him again after that." Harris tapped his pen thoughtfully. "People like this don't leave much behind. They operate in shadows, making sure they can disappear without a trace. But this man may be the key. It's possible he's the one who used your identity, or passed it along to someone else in the network." The detective looked at Marcus seriously. "We're going to need you to come down to the station again to work with a sketch artist. If we can get a likeness of this man, we might be able to track him down." Marcus nodded, though the prospect of being involved even further in this dangerous situation made him uneasy. "I'll do whatever it takes to clear my name," he said firmly. Harris gave a small smile of reassurance. "Good. And don't worry, we'll make sure you're protected. If this network is as extensive as we suspect, you could be in danger, but with your help, we can get one step closer to finding them." The detective's words filled Marcus with a new determination. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about stopping a network of criminals who had put his life in turmoil and threatened the safety of countless others. As he left the room with Harris, he felt a strange mix of fear and courage. He was stepping into the unknown, facing a threat he'd never expected. But he knew one thing for certain: he would fight to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Closer to the truth. After Marcus had described the mysterious man to a sketch artist at the police station, Detective Harris and his team got to work. They put out feelers, shared the sketch within law enforcement networks, and began searching through databases for any potential matches. Hours passed, but Marcus could feel they were getting closer. Each small breakthrough only fueled his determination to clear his name and bring the truth to light. Meanwhile, Marcus was feeling the strain. His life had been turned upside down, and each hour at the station only reminded him how far he was from the peaceful life he once knew. But just as he was beginning to lose hope, Detective Harris appeared, his expression serious yet energized. "Marcus," Harris began, "we may have found something." The detective led him into a room with a large computer screen displaying a series of photographs, documents, and background information. Harris pointed to one photo in particular, a picture of the man Marcus had described to the sketch artist. "This man," Harris said, "is a known associate of one of the country's most elusive crime syndicates. His name is Albert Green, though he's used many aliases. He specializes in identity theft, and he has been linked to various high-profile crimes. Marcus's heart pounded as he looked at the photo, recognizing the man who had approached him months earlier at his community event. So, this is the guy who's been using my identity. Harris nodded. Most likely. We believe he may have stolen information from you during that encounter, details that allowed him to create a false identity. By using your name and background, he could avoid suspicion and operate under the radar. Marcus felt a wave of anger rise within him. All this time, he's been out there committing crimes, and I had no idea. I trusted him. I thought he was just a curious person at my event. Harris placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. This isn't your fault. These people are experts at manipulating others. They target individuals with clean reputations because it makes them easier to hide behind. Just then, another officer entered the room with a new report. Detective Harris, we've confirmed that Green recently withdrew a large sum of money from an offshore account using Marcus's name. The transaction happened a week ago. Marcus's eyes widened. He's still using my name. Even now. Harris looked at Marcus, his expression grim. It means he's still active. And as long as he's out there, your name could be associated with more crimes. But here's the good news. This recent transaction gives us a lead. If we act quickly, we might be able to trace him. Harris turned to the team, issuing orders to trace the transaction and mobilize units to search for Green. Within moments, the station buzzed with activity, officers preparing for what could be a significant breakthrough. As Marcus watched the organized chaos, he felt a glimmer of hope. It was the first time since his arrest that he truly believed they might catch the man responsible for his ordeal. Harris turned back to him, a determined look on his face. Marcus, we're going to need you to stay here at the station. This could take hours, but I want you to be safe. Green is dangerous, and he won't take kindly to us closing in on him. Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll stay, whatever it takes to end this. With that, Harris and his team left, leaving Marcus alone to wait, his heart pounding with anticipation. Each tick of the clock felt like an eternity, as he wondered if they'd finally catch the man who had wreaked havoc on his life. After what felt like an eternity, Detective Harris returned, his face a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. Marcus, he said, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, we got him. Albert Green has been taken into custody. Relief washed over Marcus, and he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The nightmare was almost over, and the truth was finally coming to light. You said, justice and redemption. Marcus took a deep breath as he sat across from Detective Harris one last time, a sense of relief and calm settling over him. The news of Albert Green's capture had spread through the station, and for the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt like he could finally begin to reclaim his life. Detective Harris placed a folder on the table in front of Marcus. We've gathered the evidence we need, Marcus. Green has confessed to several of the crimes, and we've connected his transactions and aliases directly back to him. You're officially cleared. Marcus closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of those words. Cleared. It was a simple word, but it meant freedom and a return to normalcy, a chance to rebuild everything that had been torn apart. Thank you, Detective, Marcus said, his voice filled with gratitude, for believing me and for working so hard to get to the truth. Harris gave a slight smile, nodding. You don't need to thank us, Marcus. We're just glad we caught the right person. Green was a master manipulator, but in the end, his carelessness was his downfall. And honestly, if it weren't for your determination and cooperation, this could have gone on much longer. Marcus felt a sense of pride well up in him. He had endured sleepless nights, intense interrogations, and a crushing feeling of doubt. But through it all, he'd kept faith in the truth. As he left the station, he was greeted by a small group of his community members who had come to support him. They cheered, hugged him, and welcomed him back with open arms. Word had spread that he had been cleared, and the people he'd helped over the years had rallied to stand by his side. One of his closest friends from the community, a woman named Carla, stepped forward. "We never doubted you, Marcus," she said warmly. "We knew the truth would come out." Marcus smiled, grateful for the loyalty and support he'd received. "Thank you all. I couldn't have made it through this without knowing I had friends like you." But as he looked around at the familiar faces, he knew there was still one more thing he had to do. He needed to share his story, not just for himself, but for others who might find themselves in similar situations. He arranged to hold a public gathering where he spoke about the experience, the hardships he faced, and the lessons he had learned. In his speech, he didn't focus on the hardships or on Green's betrayal, but on the importance of resilience, courage, and community support. "No one should have to go through this alone," he said, his voice steady and strong. "When we stand together, when we fight for the truth, justice will prevail." His words resonated deeply with the audience, who left feeling inspired and hopeful. Days later, Marcus resumed his work with the community, more passionate than ever. He had been through an ordeal that had shaken him to his core, but he emerged stronger, a true symbol of resilience and redemption. As he looked forward, he knew he would carry the lessons of this experience with him, using them to fuel his mission to help others, no matter what challenges came his way. Marcus's journey was a reminder to all who heard his story. Even in the darkest times, the truth can and will shine through.